Thanks, Don. We do have two questions from the audience that I want to make sure we cover. So I'm going to start off with a question that was submitted from one of our public servants out in cyberspace. Simon Gasson asked for major organizations sort of in that 30,000 employee range with major technical debt. It seems like an insurmountable endeavor to embrace blockchain. Can you give us your best advice? And I think that's a great question. There's probably a lot of people that are feeling that same challenge.
Well, this problem comes about with any big new paradigm in technology. And I wrote the book Paradigm Shift, so I can use that word, okay? I didn't invent the word. It really came out of
not trademarked.
A book in the 60s called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I just applied it beyond science. Thomas Kuhn was the guy. But when you get a new paradigm, these things are a mental model and they put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong that we don't know that they're there. And they create a leadership crisis where they're received with coolness, or even worse, mockery, hostility. Vested interests fight against change. Leaders of the old had to have difficulty embracing the new. And sure, there's a technology legacy. You know, this massive installed base of trillions of dollars of heavy metal. But I used to say, well, God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base. So this is a big challenge of how you get from here to there. How do you create the conditions whereby new investments contribute to a desired future as opposed to building up your legacy? Because every time you spend money in the old way, you're making it worse. So this has always been a big challenge when you get a new paradigm in technology. And this is probably the biggest one. Now, the good news is that blockchains integrate and can integrate with our existing systems in all kinds of ways. And as I said, don't think about boiling the ocean. I mean, sure, think big, but start small, implement pilots around real burning needs and issues that you have, where there are real pain points in the organization. And that's the way companies are moving forward. Now, sometimes you think big and you do it big. I mean, Mukesh Ambani's the chairman of Reliance Industries, the largest company in India. And I sat with him for a couple of hours in his boardroom when we used to be able to travel. You guys probably don't remember, but there were these big things that take you up in the sky and you go somewhere and then you get out and you go visit people in offices and stuff. But he says, I want to deliver blockchain as a service to 300 million people on our geo network. He says, I want to solve the problem of financial inclusion, land titles. I want to do a whole bunch of things, and they're now rolling that out. So, and you have other organizations that are large, like China. China's kind of large, that are changing their currency to a blockchain-based digital currency. So there are huge, massive things that are underway. And the writing is on the wall for companies that are just paralyzed. And to me, the biggest legacy is not the technology legacy. It's the legacy of culture and attitudes and management systems that lock us into old ways of thinking about things.
Great answer. Thanks so much, Don. And I want to give a shout out again to the Blockchain Research Institute, because you do have a lot of lighthouse projects on there that talk about use cases that are actually things that organizations can look at how they might execute against something similar. That'll give you a lot of great ideas. So it's good to check out those resources. And like I said, we will send out the link to the recording as well as the link to the Blockchain Research Institute when we send this out. Next question that came from the audience. So I have a difficult time envisioning the global ledger concept, particularly when it comes to concepts of self-sovereign identity and information crossing borders. Is the global ledger concept viewed as one that evolves over time out of multiple industry and community focused ledgers that eventually interoperate somehow? How are standards organizations looking at this today? And I think it kind of references some of what Johnathan was asking about earlier.
That was a perfect formulation from whoever asked the question. That's exactly what is happening. It's not some big, massive global ledger. Sign on to the ledger. There are tens of thousands of blockchain implementations. And some of them use a public blockchain network like Ethereum or Cosmos or Polkadot. Others use a permissioned or more private network, such as Hyperledger that comes from the Linux Foundations. And the big advocate of that is IBM. But over time, these things will be able to interoperate in certain ways. Sometimes you don't want them to interoperate, and sometimes you want a private ledger. I mean, if you're a bank, you might want a ledger that only your customers can use. You got to be a customer to be able to use it, and that's a legitimate thing as well. So, but over time, that's how these things are going to come together. There was I think a second part of the question. I forget what it was.
How
Did I
standard
answer it?
organizations
Oh
are
yeah,
looking.
standards, right. So I got off a long call yesterday, and I think I can pre-announce this. It's a committee of the World Economic Forum. It's the Global Futures Council on Blockchain. And we spent a lot of time trying to map the whole standards world. And this is a document that will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And it's going to be enormously helpful. At the Blockchain Research Institute, we do a lot of this work as well. Now you look at some of this stuff and you go, whoa. I mean, it reminds me of the old joke. The great thing about standards is there are so many to choose from. But standardization is absolutely critical. You know, you think about the second industrial age, it was the electrical power grid and standards around that enabled that to happen. The first was the steam engine. We had standards around rails. You know, in the United States, you used to have a railway that would stop in the middle of somewhere, and all the passengers would get off the train. Then they would go to another train that had a different gauge, and another train would take off, and they'd unload all the stuff from one train and load it on to the next train. That's kind of where we're at right now with blockchain, but that will change.
Awesome.
Let me just say one more thing on this. You know, people say, oh man, these are such big technical problems. I can't see this ever happening. It's reminiscent of 1995 when I would show people the web. And I don't know, Emily, you're too young to remember, but I
I do remember.
but I bet you Alan would, that this is how a web page would load because it was called dial up. And I showed that to my kids. The first time I saw Mosaic, I said, this is going to change the world, kids. And they were like, Dad, you can't be serious. And people would say, oh, I'm never going to use that stupid thing. People would also say stuff like, well, I'm a manager. I'm not going to learn how to type. Do I look like a secretary to you? So there were all of these things about the immaturity of the web and our ability to embrace it that seemed like a real showstopper at the time, but they weren't. And the same thing is happening today.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you. So now that we're over time, I'm going to actually just go to Alan and Johnathan for some final thoughts on some of the
Sure.
Q&A and the things that you added over the discussion. Alan, can I start with you?
Absolutely. So I love the questions from the audience there. It actually hit right in the vernacular of, I think, where I started, right? Of like, what are the challenges and how do we overcome some of these obstacles? And you did a great job describing and helping the audience understand, I think, that we're all in this together, right? It's up to all of us to help make this. This is a big technology leap and challenge. And how do we all contribute to that? And I can't agree more. Like, that's why Michael sits on a lot of standards boards, as you kind of alluded to too, of like, how do we move this forward? To him, it's the most important because of everything we're doing around the just-in-time supply chain. And it's inherent to how we run our business and help service our customers, especially through challenging times like now. Like, we had no forecasted demand for, what suddenly happened in our challenging time this year with the pandemic breaking out for, extra tens of millions of PCs to enable work at home. But yet we were able to make it happen and execute better than anybody in the industry because of what we have in place, and certainly underpinned by blockchain technology. I might have one other quick question, even though we're over time, if you don't mind, Emily. Just as kind of, this is probably a layup question, Don, because I'm sure you get asked this one a lot. And again, back to, since we know blockchain is all about trust, I still think even in the technology community, talking to our customers, there's a lot of confusion, right? Especially back to our analogy of Bitcoin versus blockchain. Like, people mix the terminologies and don't really understand the difference. And so they see reports, right, of Bitcoins being stolen, and they think, oh, it's possible to hack the blockchain then, right?
Yeah.
What would be your response here? I know how I'd answer it, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, if you know how to turn a chicken McNugget into a chicken, you could do that, but nobody's figured that out yet. And there are different types of blockchains. Started with Bitcoin, and I'll try and do this really quickly. Bitcoin has never been hacked, and no one even knows how that could be done, let alone do it. Because here's how it works. If I send you a Bitcoin, that's broadcast out to a global network of millions of computers, each using the highest level of cryptography. And there are a subset of those people called miners, not young people like gold miners. And they do a lot of work to validate that transaction. Every 10 minutes, a block gets created that contains all the transactions from the last 10 minutes. The fact that I just sent you that money, but ultimately could be the fact that somebody got married, or somebody bought a stock, or a light bulb bought some power from a distributed power source, or anything. And then the miners go to work using their massive computing power, estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than Google. And they compete to validate that block. And the first miner to come up with the proof receives some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain, in this case, Bitcoin. And then this is the important part of the question. That block is connected to the previous block with a digital wax seal. And the block is only valid if it references the previous block. So if I wanted to hack that block and take that $1,000 money and send it to Emily and others, I'd have to hack that block plus the previous block plus I'd have to hack every transaction that ever occurred on Bitcoin since it got created, not just on one computer using the highest level of cryptography, but across millions of computers all around the world simultaneously, while the most powerful computing resource in the world is watching me to make sure I don't mess around. Now, that's going to be tough to do. So, and that's called proof of work. Now, there are other types of blockchains that don't involve all of that energy and so on. Now, it doesn't mean you can't hack an application on top of a blockchain, and there have been countless examples of that, exchanges being lost. And we had this horrific case a little over a year ago of, we're over my time here, and I have people beeping at me. I apologize for this. Quadriga, where that was a big problem. So anyway, there are a number of lessons here, but the big one is, if you're going to build an application, make sure you do a good job on it.
That was a great response.
All right, Johnathan, your turn.
All right. So, I mean, my background is AI, and, the hard problem is predicting the future. And you're right, we can't predict what the future is. But I do really like the idea of democratizing data, democratizing, and helping people who need help, for sure. I'm definitely, as I said before, I'm definitely challenged to see how we can get it applicable. I'm very excited to see what the catalyst will be to make blockchain what we all would like, on this call at least, would like it to be. So I look forward to what's next. But the realist in me also keeps me skeptical. But great minds are working on this, like you, Don. So hopefully, we'll find that catalyst. We'll get over that hump. We'll have blockchain in our pockets. We'll all control our data, and nobody's going to get hacked ever again. And we'll all live happily ever after. So back to you, Emily.
I like it. Yeah, that's definitely thinking big. So I think with that, we'll all set about trying to start small on some things. Don, thank you so much for your time. You're a total rock star. Of course, we knew that when we booked you, but I think this was even better than we had hoped for. So thank you so much for the time. And again, we will be sending out some of these links that we referenced today. I encourage people to check out some of the content on Coursera that you referenced with INSEAD and the phenomenal work that you and Alex are doing in that space to get people educated in this area. And thank you to all those that attended. And most importantly, thank you to Dell Technologies for sponsoring this thought leadership event today.
Thanks for inviting me. It was great to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thanks all.